There is so much that we have to accomplish. I just flew in from Boston from the National Conference on Media Reform. 3,000 people gathered there, deeply concerned about the state of today's media. Several weeks ago, Secretary of State Hillary Clinton testified before the Senate, and she criticized the commercial media as well. She said, we're in an information war and we are losing that war. Viewership of Al Jazeera is going up in the United States because it's real news, she said. This was Hillary Clinton's words. She went on to say, you may not agree with it, but you feel like you're getting real news around the clock instead of a million commercials and arguments between talking heads and the kind of stuff we do on our news. So, interestingly, Hillary Clinton was asking for more funding for the overseas propaganda organs for the U.S. government. Her description was absolutely accurate when you look at what we do in this country and what networks like Al Jazeera do. But her prescription, how we should deal with this, was 100% wrong. Hillary Clinton so accurate in describing the state of American media, but so wrong when talking about what we need to do. Because we need more genuine news and less propaganda. Media Studies professor Robert McChesney spoke this past weekend, and he said on Democracy Now! The smart thing to do is to take most of that $750 million that she's asking for, add it onto what's being spent currently in the United States, and create a really dynamic, strong, competitive public and community broadcasting system that treats the U.S. government the same way it treats other governments, the same standard of journalism, then broadcast that to the world, make that fully accessible to the whole world, and I think that would show the United States at its very best. Demonstrates that, like the aspen groves of the Rocky Mountains, these small stations are resilient, strong, and deeply rooted in their communities. Their funding is an investment that must be preserved. Not only funding them at the government level, but most importantly, the mass amount of the funding for independent media comes from you, from listeners and viewers like you. Whether we're talking KPFA in Berkeley, or whether we're talking about KRCB, public television and radio throughout the Bay Area, or Link TV that's here today, or Free Speech TV that was at the Community Media Conference, broadcasting, live streaming out throughout those days. We need a media that is not brought to us by the very corporations that have so profited from the economic disaster we're in right now. It's very serious. You know, as reporters, we have a very big job to do. We got to be on the convention floor, interviewing the delegates, seeing what the debates are, what the watchwords are. We got to get into those corporate suites. I don't know how many hors d'oeuvres I reached for to find out who is sponsoring the Republican Governors Association in those special skyboxes in Denver, who's sponsoring the Democratic Senatorial Campaign Committee. You gotta bear witness to this. And we've got to go out into the streets where the uninvited guests are, the thousands of people who also have something very important to say. See, democracy is a messy thing. And it's our job to capture it all. And we shouldn't have to get a record when we try to put things on the record. Iraq and Afghanistan. It astounded me that the model that's used to cover war is now being used to cover American cities. Because I think the embedding process has brought the media to an all-time low in this country. Now, because we're moving into another presidential election year. Protests we are seeing all over this country already. I mean, think Madison, Columbus, Lansing, all over this country. How are people going to be dealt with? How is dissent, which is essential to the functioning of democracy, will our government allow it to be expressed? Whether we're talking about the journalists who are trying to cover it or those who are expressing the dissent themselves. We know what kind of reporting. I'm not saying the reporters who embed with troops aren't great, but what perspective are you going to give as a reporter? You're sleeping with the troops, you're eating with the troops, your life is in their hands, you're giving a perspective from the trigger end of the gun. If you're going to do that, you need reporters embedded in the front lines you need reporters embedded in Iraqi hospitals and Afghan communities and the peace movement around the world to understand the full repercussions of war. And the problem isn't only being embedded in troops, it's the media embedded in the establishment in this country. We have a very special role to play. It's the reason why our profession, journalism, is the only one explicitly protected by the U.S. Constitution. Because we're supposed to be the check and balance on power. We're supposed to be holding those in power accountable. We call it that is because in this high-tech digital age with high-definition television and digital radio, still, all we ever get is static. That veil of distortion and lies and misrepresentations and half-truths that obscure reality, when what we need the media to give us is the dictionary definition of static. Criticism, opposition, unwanted interference. We need a media that covers power, not covers for power. We need a media that is the fourth estate, not for the state. And we need a media that covers the movements that create static and make history.